Welcome. Welcome back.
So let's start with a little arrival practice. Yeah. So I'm going to invite you to start with tapping your toes, if that's available to you. And then if it's also available to tap your hands against your knees. Thanks. You might add in a little sway and a little breath until you find your rhythm, a rhythm that feels soothing, a rhythm that feels organic to you. Could be slower, it could be faster. You might want to experiment a little bit. And then I'll invite you at some point in the next few moments to pause. Pause and feel the continuation, the reverberation of that movement. That acknowledgement of your own pace, meeting your own rhythm in this moment. And then when it's ready, or when you're ready, I'll invite you to open your eyes and attune back into the space. I love a little movement self-validation practice like that.
Mhm. You know, what amazes me is that it doesn't take very much sometimes, and that just a little bit of movement and presencing makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, agreed. So, anyone in here ever, I don't know, gone through a healing process? Started one, maybe didn't finish it. I don't know. Just a few. And have you ever come into like a sense of like a block? A sense of, ooh, there's some tension or a no-go. Yeah. And have you ever heard the word resistance? Ew. No. Resistance is almost or is a term that's often used in the process of healing, overused. And it also suggests a blame or a responsibility on the person who's healing, that it's almost like they're obstinate to their own healing process. Yeah. And we're going to offer a reframe to that because there's something really normal. Yeah. I saw everyone nod their head. They've been in a healing process. They've felt that experience where they're going, and then, oh, no, 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 no. I'm going to backslide a little bit or slide to the right or slide to the left, but I'm not going where I've been going. And the reframe to that is to first acknowledge that that is a normal experience. And instead of blaming, shaming the moments where we come into a pause, we want to recognize, ooh, what more is needed here for change, for the continuation of change? Is there a need for more energy, a need for more time, space, support, resources, capacity? Yeah. So instead of taking the responsibility or the blame, we start to turn it around and say, what more is needed here in me? Take a moment just to let that settle as a reframe for yourself. Whether this is about you or even with a client, if you're a practitioner, the switch of going, oh, they're just being resistant. They're just being challenging, to what more is needed here for them to continue in the process of change. Yeah. So take a moment just to see how that shift resonates, that mind shift, that reframe. Anyone have any resistance to that? So let's do a little practice with that. So I'm going to have, if it's available for you, to make a fist. And this is a practice I learned from my teacher, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohn. Oh, yeah. Woo, Bonnie. So I want to have you squeeze it really tight. Yeah. And we might call this the pausing. Yeah, the moment where something happens in our healing process and we brace because it's new, it's different, it's scary. What's in the next moments to come? Will I have enough resource, support, energy, time? Keep squeezing. And then try to open your hand. Yeah. Ow. Notice the amount of effort it takes to do that. Okay. Maybe shake your hand a little bit. Say, I'm so sorry. No. I'm going to have you bring your hand back to a fist. If it's available for you, take your other hand, wrap it around that fist. First, we're going to meet the pressure that's already there. So my hand above gives a little pressure of acknowledgement. I'm here with you. Yeah. And let the bottom hand, the hand that's in the fist, feel the temperature, the texture of the hand above that's holding it. Yeah. And then begin to invite the hand that's curled up to unfurl into the hand of support. Huh. What's different about that? Instead of just saying, ooh, change the resistance, what if we meet it? What did you find? What did you find in meeting what's here and being and allowing there to be a support, something for it to open into? Easier? Wasn't uncomfortable, less painful? Yeah. Yeah. And there's that too. Yeah. So part of what we're looking into this session as we talk about the process of healing the next 5 days is how do we meet ourselves or allow ourselves to be met, which is also scary. Yeah. And what do we need as we come up against these pauses, as we come into these pauses that perhaps need more time? I'm just repeating the things: energy, capacity, resources, support. Because often those are the things that we're missing that didn't allow us to process and metabolize the thing when we experienced it, that then became the thing that's holding within us. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll pass it to you.
Yes, I know. Thinking of a few things in response to what you just shared, Scott. One is that when we reframe resistance as information, then it allows us to come in and be curious and to offer our curiosity in itself is the first step, I think, often of the transformational process. Perhaps coupled with curiosity, we can start to bring in compassion. And of course, Gabor spoke so beautifully about the necessity of compassion being at the heart of any healing modality. And often as we're turning towards the change process, this stuckness shows up, and it's actually a necessary part of the journey. So we can go back to saying, there's actually nothing wrong happening if I'm feeling resistance or stuck or this impasse. If you look at Gestalt, for example, and Fritz Perls's work, we see that impasse is built in as one of the phases of change. And that actually it's the impasse that allows us to build up enough pressure, even enough discomfort with the status quo, to then feel like I'm ready. I can't do it like that anymore. Something has to give. And as much as in the healing relationship, we might lean into another person who will encourage us to move past that impasse, truly the only person that can do that is us, is ourselves. We are the only one that can take us past that impasse. Now, the beauty of this support relationship, and it's much of what we'll speak about tonight, is knowing that there is a ground that can help hold us in the midst of uncertainty. Because I don't know about you, but change and novelty and uncertainty can feel scary. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah, right? We might even have a part of us that says, I'm ready. I want that change. I want to feel more freedom. I want to feel more at home in myself or comfortable around other people. And then we have this polarity that many of us experience. I know I do, between the part of me that says, I'm ready, I want all of that, and another part that's like, I'm not so sure. That feels scary. Or I don't really know yet that I can live into that possibility, into that new version of myself. I know myself to be, afraid or the victim or small or scared of public speaking. I mean, I'll just share a little bit there that I spent years and years and years of my life afraid to get out in front of groups of people to speak. And there was a part of me that knew that this was a journey. It was something I was meant to do. I really love to do this. And that conflict was so strong, right? And so sometimes what we end up working with is this polarity that we have inside of ourselves. And the challenging thing that happens in the healing relationship is that sometimes that polarity gets played out between us, where all of a sudden, say, you're my client, right? Or, we're working together
I'd be
and
honored.
what?
I'd be honored.
Oh, and what you're presenting to me is the fear,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden I'm presenting all the possibility. Well, guess what happens? We end up in a dance together that gets kind of uncomfortable. The more that I will sit in the seat of hope and possibility, the more that Scott's going to be like, I'm not changing. Right? And so ideally what we can do then is actually hand to the other, in a sense, these same two hands.
Yeah.
I'm going to hold the space, I'll hold the compassionate third, but ultimately what I want to do is hand to the other that polarity and so deeply, compassionately love that in you, be present with that, know that dilemma because I know that in me.
Yeah.
Right? So many of you have heard me speak before, and if you haven't, you'll hear this for the first time from me, but I stand again and again to the truth that we are human first. Doesn't matter which side of the couch I'm sitting on. I'm human first. And if I can know my own humanity, my own vulnerability, my own resistance, my own impasses, my own sense of what's possible, then I can see that in another and appreciate it, or sit inside of the depth and the discomfort and the rub of it,
Yeah.
right? It's a little bit like that pearl in the oyster, right? What do we know that polishes it? It's the grit, it's the sand.
Mm. Such a beautiful metaphor.
Mhm.
And I think there's another piece here, in addition to the time, energy, space, support, resources, is we all have to also know, will we be okay? Often some of the fears of healing is that, will I go back and will it be worse than when I first experienced it? So we'll be entering into some practices Many of you might have know the word titration, but about stepping in or just little parcels into an experience to go, oh, I can feel and be okay. The reassurance, even by another person or by support, to say, you can let go a little and still be held by the chair.
Mhm.
Some reassurance that there's a future. Because when we're stuck in the past, we have no sense that there could be a future.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that one of our great teachers in this field, Dan Siegel, right? Who loves Dan Siegel here, right? And he offers up this understanding that uncertainty
Mm.
equals possibility
Mhm.
equals freedom. And that so much of what we are cultivating in this work is to create just a little bit more okayness with uncertainty.
Yeah.
And it's edgy. It's edgy and it's exciting. I'll borrow from Fritz Perls again. It gets attributed to him. I'm not sure if he's actually the one that said it, but at least the phrase that that anxiety is excitement without the breath.
Mm.
Right. Yeah. You want to just take a breath with that one? Yeah. So just allowing yourself to feel into the potential that sits right at that juncture of anxiety and excitement. And that ultimately what we want to build our capacity to do around this is to hold what we'll call a both and we'll come back around to that in a little bit.
And one of the challenges we face in this is, who will I be?
Mhm.
Who will I be in this change? And I think one of the things that's hardest in this process is to give up the identity we formed around our experiences. Yeah, I can speak from my own experience in my own process of navigating trauma as a child and feeling like the world was coming at me all the time. And so I identified that the world was against me. I was the victim to the world. And even after I'd done a lot of the core healing, I still held the belief, the identity. And it was almost harder to give up that identity because I was like, I don't know what's on the other end of who I could be if I'm not this, a victim in the world. And I remember in a session with a practitioner where I said, I'm ready to have a funeral for that part of me. And I gave a eulogy to that part of me that was ready to be let go of, that identity, and ready to step forward into who I am now in the here and now as I let go of it.
Mhm. Yeah. Scott knows I have a bit of a parallel story. I actually loved that when you shared that, in a sense, that identity for you was like carrying around a backpack full of rocks, right?
Yeah.
Like this heaviness. And so when I worked with that fear of public speaking, you know, the way that the psyche holds these constructs or these identities or these experiences is sometimes quite complex. And we have to, in a sense, kind of trust that the psyche will take us where we need to go in a process. And that at one point it took me into being a child and being in an environment where instead of being looked at with the loving gaze, I got looked at with the scrutinizing judgment.
Mm.
And you know, I loved when Gabor spoke last night about how sometimes it's those big glaring traumatic events, and sometimes it's the accumulation of the ongoing experience of the lens with which we are seen. And you know, for me, that scrutinizing, judgmental, critical gaze accumulated and accumulated and accumulated until not only was that the gaze with which I saw myself, but it is also the gaze which I projected that other people were seeing me. You know that one, right?
Yeah.
So the next thing I know, I'm giving public talks and I'm scanning the room for the critical face. And it was a realization that I was doing that, that allowed for a significant perceptual shift, that I started to learn to scan the room for the smiles and for the nods and for those depths of moments of people that really valued what I was here to share. And those who didn't value it, they could still be in the room, but I wasn't going to let that dominate my consciousness or my self-perception anymore. And it became smaller and it became smaller. But there's one more part of this story that, again, is kind of following where the psyche will take us, that actually, as I continued to follow the thread of the fear of being visible, the fear of being seen, and the urge to hide, it went further back and it went further back to, well, I noticed this in my parents and I noticed this in these certain ways generations back. And then it took me into being a Jewish person and my ancestors, this legacy of persecution and the urge to hide, to avoid that. And so there was, again, a pivotal session, not that, pivotal sessions are great, but they are the result of the accumulation of all of the work that builds to that pivotal session, mind you, right? Right? It's not like, well, the one magic session, but there was a pivotal moment in which I did a constellation. Anyone here familiar with family constellation work, right? And so I was doing a constellation and I had laid out in front of me the generations back where being visible was a threat. And the practitioner that I was working with said, she pulled out this big, heavy basket with big, heavy rocks. And she said, I want you to pick up the rock of the burden you've been carrying, or the rocks, right? As many as I needed to represent the weight of what I had been living in me all these years, right? And so as I pick up these rocks, and she says, and give them back. It's not your job to carry this. And as I laid them down, something rather enormous happened. I nearly fainted. The room spun. I got nauseous. I sunk to my knees on the floor without even thinking about it. It was such a moment. I didn't even know what I was carrying in my physiology until, like you with the eulogy, it was time to set it down.
Yeah.
What we carry in our physiology at the level of our cells, right, is profound. And not only do I feel profoundly grateful to those who have helped me set down those burdens, but it is an incredible honor to help others do the same. Anyone feel that way? Right? Woo! Right? Yeah.
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 Thank you for sharing that. I know it's not easy to share.
Yeah.
And such an
It's
important.
gotten easier.
It's gotten easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm.
I think one of the things we also carry around that's so familiar for many of us is not just the burdens of the past, but then the ways we have internalized them, the way we have opinionated them or criticized them in the shape of shame. Yeah. Anyone here familiar with that?
The
Yeah.
constellation of
That
shame.
process of shame.
The whole room got quiet. No, not me.
Not
I
me.
don't know that one. I'll raise my hand.
You know, when I think about shame, it's easy to just go, oh, that's bad. But if we have the capacity to experience it, it has an evolutionary purpose to it. Yeah. So I think it's imperative to understand the biological and evolutionary reason we have it. It's an immobilizer. It creates a pause in its intention. Yeah. It's like pushing the pause real hard, real fast on the remote of our lives in our nervous system. Yeah. And so it's a moment often where it's an invitation to reflect on what's happening. How are we in relation to ourselves and someone else, someone else's values, our values? And we call that biological shame. Yeah.
Mhm.
I'm quoting Corinne Bell here because I got this from her and I said I would name the next part. Is in that, whatever the problem is, whatever the challenge is that induced the pause button, someone's yelling at us. Yeah. Whatever it is, the problem is the problem. We're not the problem.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. And in that biological shame, it's meant to have a repair cycle to it. A parent yells at a child, "Get out of the street. What are you doing? I love you so much. Your safety is everything to me." There's the repair. And I really need us to attend or look at what's happening before we go into the street. There's a moment of pause to learn, reflect, grow in an ideal world. So the shame mechanism, biological mechanism, is there in its best purpose as a pause. But often it goes wrong, right? And we get something called toxic shame. Toxic shame is when that repair never happens, when we internalize that experience and we become the problem. It's no longer about, oh, you ran into the street. It's, you're so stupid. You ran into the street. I'm so stupid.
Mhm.
And in that freeze, I never let go of it. The pause button is on in my
Mhm.
system. And it holds the internalization of the thoughts and the feelings and the beliefs that come with that never got to be repaired. We never got to hit the play button in the repair and unfreeze. And so often, even as shame is coming up in our own healing process, it's a moment to say, ooh, is this also related to a repair that never got to happen? Huh. What if I got to be that sense, that partner of repair? Or what if I called Arielle and she gets
Mhm.
to be that partner of repair that never got to happen then, as shame rises up in my system in my own process of healing?
Mhm. Yeah. I love that you brought it into the context of the child and the parent, because so often the roots of shame begin very young. And, so many of you know that my work is really specializing in complex PTSD, especially in the context of developmental wounds. And when a child is growing up in a frightening environment, terrifying environment, shame serves a related purpose here, which is that it's a suppressor. We spoke about it as a immobilizer, and it also dampens down the reality of the incoming sensory experience of fear or terror. And so sometimes we can, in a sense, bind ourselves to the shame because it's safer to be in something that suppresses the other emotions than to be in the reality of the fear and the terror. So shame becomes this pseudo safe place, and then it becomes a part of our identity the longer that we live in that experience.
It's almost like it soaks in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And, so a big question, of course, is how do we unwind from shame? How do we heal? And in part, it's very much about how we lean into the safe enough spaces. And safe is a tricky word. We all know that, but the places of connection where I receive the permission and the acceptance and the compassion that I can't yet offer for myself. And we call that co-regulation.
Yeah. So co-regulation is that caring presence while still maintaining my own presence.
Mhm.
That's really imperative in this. So many of us are caregivers in the room, right? There's the hands. in some capacity, whether it's to our children or parents or clients or friends. Yeah. And so often in what we might consider co-regulation sometimes looks more like we're giving ourselves up for someone else. We are not in our presence with their presence. We are giving our presence away. And so co-regulation is a skill about really being here with what's here. You know, biologically or in developmental process of co-regulation, you know, a caregiver is offering the containment for the infant whose own nervous system hasn't been fully developed. Those self-regulatory skills that we prize ourselves on as adults, we don't have that as kids. That's a learned process, a modeled and learned process. And that modeling comes from if the opportunity is there, for that caregiver to be the container to help that infant process and metabolize their experience so that they learn and grow that they can begin to do that for themselves. And even as we learn and grow to be able to do that with ourselves, we don't lose the capacity to be held as well or connected with. Sometimes we do. And so, you know, these programs, for example, are containers. We said that on the first day, just in the same way. Yeah. And I think it's really important to recognize that even when there is a support that's here, like I love this woman. She is my support system, ride or die, you know? But I still got to do it on my own too. But I'm not on my own. There's a radical responsibility in healing that's sometimes difficult to accept, is even when the support is here, it's to be held to move through the process within myself.
When we think about developmental trauma, I'll lean back into that for a moment. One of the biggest consequences is that we didn't have that holding environment. We didn't have that other that offers that care and co-regulation and attunement and bonding, all of these, I call them the ABCs of attachment, right? And so we come into adulthood and we're missing some of the foundational building blocks that we need to learn to successfully hold ourselves and to even know what it feels like sometimes to even have a self. Right? It can be compromised to such a degree that I may live inside of a pseudo self again. I'll use that word pseudo because that's all I've known. And I actually don't know what it feels like to reside and exist or to even know what it feels like to have needs. Because life has been in service, even from infancy at times, in attuning to, the infant is a role reversal, right? I'm attuning to the needs of the other from day one. There's beautiful research out there that shows that what emotions an infant has a range of expressing gets shaped by what gets attuned and mirrored back to them in the first 6 months of life. So we have a task set before us in this healing journey to discover, what does it mean to have a self? What does that feel like? And we can't do that without embodiment because the infant doesn't have words. The earliest experiences of co-regulation is a somatic experience. It's how we were touched and rocked. It's the sounds that we heard. It's the facial expressions. It's the dance that happens between us as people. And I often describe this quality of the infant parent dance as this nervous system exchange, right? And that there is this way in which the infant signals a bid for connection. And ideally, there's a parent that honors that and, and reflects that back. And then there's this exchange, and there's an excitement and a burst, and an excitement and a burst, and we go, oh, right? Like a delight and joy. And then the infant does something really essential. The infant turns away. If you've ever looked at the work of Ed Tronick, he was the person behind the still face experiment with the parent and child, and he was one of my mentors in grad school. And he would show these videos of the parent-infant exchange, and that moment that the infant turns away, it's a parasympathetic reset. It's a returning into self. And it's a signal that says that was enough sensory input for me to process. And I need to come back and digest that. And the good enough attuned parent will recognize that and allow for the pause, allow for the settling as we both digest what just occurred. And what Ed Tronick observed is that the misattunements or the ruptures in connection that start so early are often the missing of those cues around connection and disconnection, or engagement and disengagement. But in truth, the rhythms of regulation, to borrow from Deb Dana, are very much about engagement and disengagement. The rhythms of regulation are not engage, 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 right? We will get sensorially overwhelmed in doing so. So, Scott and I are going to offer,
Before we
yes,
go there, I just want to
yes,
name, like, and that's so important in a healing process. It's not
yes,
heal, 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 heal,
that's
heal.
right.
You got to take a day off, y'all. Not now, because we have 5 days in a row. But after this, especially,
Yeah,
and it's like we move in and then we move out.
yeah,
And that's a balancing act. That's so important.
yes,
And I'll say one more thing is that
yeah.
ruptures happen in relationships. Healing happens in relationships.
Mhm,
Doesn't have to be this relationship.
mhm,
It could be this relationship. Ruptures happen in relationship from myself to myself,
mhm,
myself to others, myself to the world. And healing happens in relationship.
mhm,
Reconnecting, rebuilding, repairing what has been ruptured.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that also, just to go back and tie it in a little bit, when we ask the question, how do we deal with shame? Where can we make repair in relationships? Can be one road in to letting go that which has been holding, and all the things we have attached to that bracing.
Mhm. Yeah. I'll also just name that, as we do have these 5 days, I think, 4 more, wherever we are in our journey.
I think we're at day 20.
3 more. Um, but as we navigate this time together, what we're speaking about is, at least for me, an essential component of how I can stay grounded inside of a room with 500 people, right? Or 600, or wherever we are here. And, to know that there's a lot of potential for energetic output and exchange and receiving sensory input, and that can get overwhelming. I don't know about anyone else, but that can get overwhelming. And so to know how to navigate connection and simultaneously return back, or at least pendulate back to connection with yourself, and to know when the rhythm of disengagement is the primary rhythm, and to honor that. I think so often we override that need to come back to self because we feel guilty. We feel like we're not, all of a sudden, not taking care of someone else, or we're hurting someone's feelings, whatever, that can lead us to then jump over that step. And in truth, when we take self-responsibility, as you're speaking to, Scott, it allows us to give others the permission to do the same. Like, oh my gosh, I was sitting next to someone yesterday and we were having this lively conversation. And right in the middle of it, I was like, hang on a moment, I need to go inside. And I just disrupted and the conversation went in. But I feel like if we don't do that, if we don't model it, then we'll all be stuck out here. Right? And so it gives the whole rhythm of connection and self-care along the way, a lot more breathing room. Yeah.
Let's do a
Yes.
practice.
Yes.
We're going to model a practice. I'll have Arielle explain it in a moment, but
Mhm.
and then we're going to have you explore it.
Yeah.
Sound good?
All right. So what we'll do in this moment, and that you can do if you choose to engage in this, remember everything's a choice here. Everything is a choice. Um, is that we will explore how it feels to be in connection and to very mindfully track the subtle cues of when I have abandoned myself for the sake of connection. Remember how Gabor spoke yesterday about that um, bind that pretty much every child, but especially a child in the context of misattunement and ruptures, will feel this bind between authenticity and attachment. And we all carry some variant of that, most of us do, into adulthood. And so it's a practice to notice, when have I self-abandoned for the sake of connection? And what are the signals that my body gives me that I have in a sense left myself? And is it really taking care of Scott if I've done that?
No.
No, you wouldn't really appreciate
Stay with
it.
you so you can stay with me. Yeah.
Exactly, right. Like actually, if there is no self, then there's no relationship.
Yeah.
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 So in our practice, it's rather simple and it won't look like a whole lot on the outside. And that's kind of the point of it, is that it's much more about what's happening here. And even as I come into eye contact with you, something happened, Scott.
What's happening?
It was right here. It was like a bubbly little, oh, wow.
And I felt myself come out to rescue you. Shit. Well, I shouldn't be a facilitator anymore.
So even that subtleness, like I noticed my gaze came down.
Yeah.
And that I can navigate when I'm ready to come back into eye contact. I'm not quite there yet. And with my gaze down, I can feel my heartbeat is still a little quickened. And this is with someone who I love and adore and is a really good friend. And it's right there, right? Like, wow, being in connection and the potential of losing myself is there. So I'll just verbalize what I'm doing so it's more explicit. I'm allowing my energy body to come back in, which means that with my gaze down, or I could do it with my eyes closed, I'm recentering my attention into what does it feel like to be me embodied in this chair right now. Oh, I'm back. Ooh,
For
there
my
it is. Yeah, go.
and for myself, and we'll touch into this tomorrow, is I remind myself there's space behind me.
Mm.
Oh. Sometimes this direct sense can bring up a lot. So I remember, or I'm remembering now, the space behind me, the space beside me, above, somewhat below.
Mm.
And then I'm going to fluff up the space in front of me. Maybe I want a little more density in that, or a sense like, oh, it's not just whoosh, but
Ooh, I didn't like that.
yeah. Sorry about that.
You fluffed in my direction.
I've left in your space. But in my imagination, it's a little more like dense clouds. Yeah. Or just a sense. How you doing now?
I recovered.
You
I
recovered
recovered from
from the whoosh.
and you know what's so funny? I mean, I'm just curious what you're noticing,
Yep.
but the humor
Yeah.
was delightful. And I
Yeah.
feel like
Yeah.
so able to come back into contact.
I agreed.
Yeah.
And I love the last session because it's like that play
Yeah.
is a permission to come back
That's
into
right.
space. When we
Yeah.
can laugh, we can feel the movement of our body and movement of space around us. Space is the medium of relationship.
Yeah.
So we tune into the space that we share
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and the space I inhabit.
That's right. That's right. One of the other clues for me about whether I'm residing in myself or have jumped ship on myself, those are the words I tend to use, is do I feel that I'm looking out from behind my eyes?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can sometimes even just remind myself to let my eyes rest so that I can look out from behind my eyes rather than reaching with my eyes forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much nuance there is in actually being in relationship, being in the potential of interpersonal support and resource.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
I
all of
mean,
that happened in 3 minutes,
oh,
right?
I mean, it's so
Yeah.
often the thing we're craving the most, many of us, is to be
Yeah.
seen and heard and connected with, touched and being touched. And it's okay to really recognize there's a lot of nuance and process to get to that place
Mhm.
of being here with it and being here with someone in it.
Mhm.
Your turn.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we will invite you to do is to just find a partner to practice this with. You might turn to one side or the other, or find someone. If you look around, if you don't have a partner, raise your hand. I need a partner. And remember, you don't have to participate.
5 minutes. And if you're at
Yeah,
home watching, you can do this with a pet or a plant or a mirror. I've done this with a mirror. That's intense. Let's take 3 minutes.
Here's the good news. If that felt too short, you have an opportunity to continue this practice for the next 3 days. Yes, for the rest of your
For the
lives.
rest of your lives.
Exactly, for the rest of your lives. And when I was first studying somatic psychology, which was back in 1996, so it's been almost 30 years that
Wow.
I began my official master's program in somatics. And this program, this practice or variation of it was taught to me by a woman named Christine Caldwell, who founded the somatic psychology program at Naropa. And yeah, whew, exactly. Great teacher. And she calls it oscillation of attention, and that there is a way in which we can notice our attentional tendencies or habits. Our attention is drawn out and we can go, oh, wait, my attention is out here. What happens when I bring my attention back in? And from a yogic perspective, wherever attention goes, energy flows. So you are literally giving energy back to yourself when you bring your attention back in. We spoke a little bit earlier about uncertainty and building our capacity for uncertainty. And I am a huge believer in the power of groups for that purpose, because groups help us hold what we cannot yet hold on our own, just like another person interpersonally. A group can be a group of two, and certainly the power of being in large scale groups like this, that we hold each other as we meet the edge of uncertainty, that just tolerable edge, and then we back away from it and we touch the edge again. And I know for myself that some of my most transformational personal growth moments have occurred in group spaces,
Mm,
but it requires this practice.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of that radical responsibility is
Mhm.
like, yes, the group is a transformational vehicle. And how do I stay here in that group?
Mhm.
Or if I can't be in the group in that way, to I really honor that
Mhm.
and say, how can I be here with me? Or maybe it's not the right time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And returning back to where we started in this conversation about resistance and reframing it as information and reframing it as a missing need that ultimately needs to be met, and that because we're not trying to make anything wrong or go away, now we have a different way of being with this, of working with it. And that, you know, I think that one of the most powerful ways to work with that or to hold that is through what we'll call this both and practice, that I can hold the part of me that's afraid of growth, and I can simultaneously allow the part of me that's ready for something more or seeking that change, and I can allow both to coexist. I don't have to get rid of that part that's afraid or that is feeling small. I actually just learn how to bring more of myself to that. And so like to guide a practice around this. And this, we'll call this a pairing practice. And you can choose to engage with this if you'd like as well. So what we'll find here is just to allow one of your hands perhaps to represent that part that feels a bit tentative or afraid, small, unsure, whatever the word is, maybe shame. And I'll invite you to bring your other hand and allow that to represent the part of you that says, yes, I'm ready. I came here because I want to heal. I came here because I want more for myself or the people that I serve. And that both of these experiences are welcome here, the fear and the excitement. You might even choose to bring your gaze to each of your hands, to each of your palms. You might even really cup your palms, sensing that each palm can hold that experience lovingly, welcoming both right here. Notice how it feels to offer your attention, your energy towards that part that's afraid. Can you gaze towards that or turn your attention toward that in a loving way? In a way that says, oh, honey, I see you and you're welcome here. Maybe I've ignored you for a very long time and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I made you wrong. I'm sorry I pushed you away or refused to feel you. Maybe you'll offer your attention or your gaze to that hand that says, I'm ready. I want more. And as you turn toward that, say, thank you. All in good time. Because we need to learn to work together. And you might choose to bring your hands just a little closer. You might bring them close enough that you can see both simultaneously. Holding in one hand the part that's tentative or afraid, small or ashamed, uncertain. Holding with equal care that part that says yes. And perhaps you let the edges of your hands come to touch, turning your two cupped hands into one larger bowl, one larger container, knowing that all of you is welcome here. What do you notice inside of yourself? Maybe you bring your hands lovingly back towards you in whatever form, whether that's palm to palm, palm over your heart, one palm to belly, one palm to heart. knowing that what we just externalized with our hands, with our palms, is also what lives in here, inside of us. And perhaps sensing that your body, this physical container of you, is that larger bowl, is that larger space that can hold all of the complexity of your unique human existence. Whether that is easy to feel, difficult to feel, excruciating to feel, or profoundly joyful. Again, it's all welcome here. You are welcome as you are. And all of that complexity of what it means to be human. Taking your time. If your eyes are closed, maybe blinking them open and sensing yourself in this room with a whole bunch of other courageous people who are doing just what you're doing, right? That collectively our willingness to sit in uncertainty and to hold the both and to commit to self, even as I come into relationship to other, that we build a kind of field that I often think of as this kind of fabric, this invisible fabric that was, of course, also quite visible in the faces and the bodies and the gestures. But there is this field that holds us. I think of it as a kind of, I don't know, again, safety is a tricky word, but if I were on a trapeze, going back to our circus of our clown friend here, you know, if we were on a trapeze, I know for myself, I'd sure want a safety net under me, especially if I'm going to let go of one identity in service of finding the next. I certainly would love to have this safety net under me. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's it.
that is it. Again, we're just going to encourage you to keep these practices alive as you walk through the next 3 days, even as we go into the dance tonight. And I think we'll all know now if we have those moments where we say, hang on a moment, I need to come back to self, right? Can we have that as a kind of shared agreement?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah? Thank you. Yeah, it's okay.
You can go, yeah.
They're still on the silent clap
They're
from
still on the
earlier
silent clap,
today.
yeah,
Thank you all.
Thank you all.